So we're going to be talking about sort of the long-term opportunities that India has presented and take a long view, look back maybe a couple of decades, look forward a decade, decade and a half. We're also going to be looking at some of the challenges which persist. Now, as Joseph mentioned, there's, the macros on India are celebrated worldwide. The consumption economy that India is particularly interesting for most investors. World Bank says 2017, 2018, we're 1.6 trillion consumption economy. By 2030, we're going to become a 6 trillion consumption economy, $6 trillion, right? So that's $3.5 trillion. Someone's got to make that money. So as my dad would say, might as well be us. We also have the interest from new investors, some of the global giants coming in. Equally, deepening of the pool of liquidity with the local partners coming in. And all of this is also facilitating what I would call some social good while we make money. So we've seen a lot of fund flow into microfinance institutions, into the whole theme of financial inclusion. There's a recent trend around, ESG as an important sort of discussion point and money going into ESG funds. There is an increasing focus from a governance perspective, which has been a long-term challenge that many investors have been worried about. There is also the opportunities created by the new economy, which we'll be talking about, right? Some newer themes which are not so much on our agenda today, but are on the global agenda, right? For example, how important is diversity? The participation of women in the Indian workforce shockingly has declined in the last decade. How do we reverse this trend? Because as we all know, it's just, I guess, aside from the fact that we need, socially speaking, women to be more financially independent across the country, it's also really important to hit that 8%, 9%, 10% growth rate. We can't have sort of half the population metaphorically not really working or being, underworked, as it were, right? So there's a variety of things to discuss in terms of the opportunities that we have. But at the same time, it's not, all been sort of a nice expressway. It's been a little bit of a rocky road. Currency volatility has been a long-term challenge. And I guess the bigger theme, which especially the international investors have really worried about, is around governance and transparency and the periodic convulsions that we seem to go through with liquidity squeezes suddenly coming in, big companies crash landing without warning, and all of those. So we'll be examining some of those as well, right? We'll also be looking at, how we can fix some of these things as we go forward, okay? And some of these things we're seeing already in the new economy companies, new types of governance coming through, new forms of disclosure coming through, and really a different type of engagement happening between the investor community and the entrepreneurs. So we'll examine some of that as well. We promised a big bang start, and I can't think of bangs which are much bigger than this panel, I dare say. Gentlemen, let me begin by thanking you for your time. You're all incredibly busy, and it's great to have you with us. So let's jump right in there. So guys, what I'm going to be doing is sort of halfway into the session, I will try and see if we can open up the session for some questions from yourselves. So have them ready. It's about 20 minutes in, hopefully. So Doug, as our, I love to start with those who've made the biggest effort. And you've flown in all the way from Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport, I'm sure. So thank you for joining us. And why don't we give you the opportunity to kick off looking at India as a long-term opportunity, some of the shorter-term challenges. You're a frequent visitor here. When you look at it from the lovely Netherlands, what do you see?
Thank you, Jaideep. It's a real honor for me to be here. And as you can imagine, I'm kind of reluctant in this audience and this panel to say anything whatsoever about India. I mean, who am I? A Dutchman representing a rather small investor in emerging markets and also in India. But it was Jaideep who convinced me, and he said, well, at least give us a little bit of perspective looking at it from Amsterdam. And in that environment, I'm based pretty close to Amsterdam, but I guess in Holland everything is close to Amsterdam, so that makes it rather easy. I represent Triodos Investment Management, and Triodos is a financial services group based in the Netherlands, has retail banking operations across 6 European countries. It's kind of a mid-sized retail bank and has a fairly large fund management operation. I'm part of that fund management operation looking at the emerging markets, and India at this moment of time is the largest exposure in a number of funds that we manage, in which we attract both retail capital as well as institutional capital. Triodos was set up in 1980 with one objective only, and that's, if that's anything I want to get on your radar screen, then it's perhaps what we stand for, and that is that we were set up, we were conceived, so to speak, to make money work for the better of society and make money in the process. Now that's kind of an odd thing for many people, because many people say either you do good or you do well. I think since the 1980s we've demonstrated that you can do good and you can do well at the same time. We do that by focusing on 3 specific transition themes that we think are essential to get us to a somewhat more sustainable world. Social inclusion, the energy transition, and the food transition. Those are the 3 themes that everything that we do, both from the banking perspective as well as from the fund management perspective, that we are looking at. That's also what we do here in India. And then talking about challenges and opportunities, I find it kind of easy to look at the opportunities. Because many of the challenges that you have are also opportunities, I would think, at the same time. And if I can single out one concern or one challenge that we as an international investor look at very closely and find it difficult to come to grips with, I come about 4 times a year to India. And every time I come here, I realize how little I understand of your beautiful country. It's a pretty complicated setting, and if you fly in for a week 4 times a year, coming to grips with that, that's not very easy. The single biggest concern we have is governance. Obviously, we look at return, we look at risk, like all of you do, but governance is something that really worries us at times. Has to do with transparency issues, has to do with fraud and corruption issues. Also, if you look at the management of some Indian companies that we look at, you oftentimes see a very strong promoter, but then if you look beyond the promoter, and the promoter oftentimes is quite a character actually, and they're kind of fun to engage with. But if you look beyond that promoter, if you look at the second layer, forget about the third layer, if you look at the second layer, it gets pretty thin pretty quickly. And I think that's really a point of concern. If you then also look at the lack of diversity, I think you already mentioned that the lack of diversity is kind of shocking. We find, I have to admit, in the Netherlands we're not doing all that well either. So before you start asking that question for me, I mean, I think we have a lot of room for improvement. But diversity is part of that challenge, I think. If you bring all of that together, it sometimes makes for an incident-prone environment, which has a big impact also on the capital markets. I think. Look at the recent liquidities crunch. Where has that been coming from? I think that has something to do with some of the challenges that I just named. Opportunities. Let me briefly reflect on the opportunities that we see. I mean, this is just a fantastic country to be able to work in. And I really enjoy coming here. I really enjoy looking around, going all over the country. And what I see there is just an unbelievable consumer market. I mean, so Jaideep just mentioned that. If you succeed in growing that in a responsible way, and we'll probably get back to that later today, I think that's just an unbelievable opportunity. At the same time, I think the most recent count is you have about 60 million micro, small, and medium enterprises. I mean, that's too much to fathom for me. It's just unbelievable. And if you then look again from the sustainability perspective that we are so keen on, then look, wherever you look, you see opportunity. Housing, energy, mobility, agriculture, waste, I'm connected with the growth of your consumer market, water, and I can go on. And I mean, and there is opportunities in every single sector and subsector that I mentioned. If you bring all of that together, if you succeed in focusing on that and in capitalizing and unlocking capital to also flow more into these sectors, and that's the only thing we do is work in these sectors. If you can combine that with that other big opportunity, which I just mentioned as a challenge, is unlocking your diversity. I mean, I was having breakfast in the hotel this morning and I read the Economic Times, and there was a big, you must have seen that as well, on page 1, and we're celebrating and honoring the unicorns and the entrepreneurial heroes of the Indian economic transition. There wasn't a single woman on that first page. There was one, she was a juror. But there were like all kinds of entrepreneurs that were celebrated, big smiles. And I was just staring at that page, guys, you're missing out on half of your country.
You need to fund some women entrepreneurs through Triodos as well, sir. No, they're coming through in defense of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a bunch of great women-oriented, women-led businesses coming through as well. And hopefully, while your observation is very astute, but hopefully 2 or 3 years down the line, that picture will look somewhat different. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If I look around the room, it looks a lot better. I can't see everything, but it looks a lot better, I think. Finally, unlocking that diversity and then harnessing technology. We are invested in a couple of tech enterprises here in India. I mean, and what you see, it goes beyond my imagination, I must say. But it's just fabulous. If you bring tech into agriculture, tech into energy, it's just bringing all of that together, and I think there's a bright future looking at all of it.
Thank you, sir. So, Mank, if I may come to you next. The ADB is no stranger to India. Lots of investments here, big presence. And when we think about both the opportunities from an infrastructure side and some of the core sectors of the economy, but also the associated challenges there, what's your view and how do you look at, I guess there'll be a lot of interest in the room on how do you look at projects and funds when you're investing?
Yeah, so let me just start by saying that ADB loves India. Today is the day, so I will say India is ADB's Valentine, because it's the largest recipient of ADB's assistance, both from the sovereign side and the non-sovereign. Non-sovereign is the private sector, the department which I belong to. And I'll focus on the non-sovereign or private sector part. India gives us a unique position because, you find developmental stories and also you can get scale, which is very difficult to find in most countries in the region which we operate in, which is Asia, is that you can actually make a lot of difference by deploying meaningful amounts of money. And we, broadly speaking, work on 3 themes, and that would pretty much cover, let's say, 60-70% of the GDP of the country. Infrastructure is a core focus. It's an infrastructure bank. ADB but infrastructure is more geared from a debt intervention point of view. So we provide a lot of debt to infrastructure, equity also, but less equity because financial intermediation, which is our next biggest theme, that's the story which we want to play, and we have continued playing on both equity and debt. And there we are actually targeting specifically either to small and medium enterprises, or we have done loans which are specifically directed towards women entrepreneurs and affordable housing. So these are the developmental themes in our financial intermediation. And I'll come last to our private equity strategy. That's the third important piece of what we do in India, is to back homegrown fund managers who have got some track record and who are investing in these sectors which we are and there the sector definition is a little bit broad, which is the 3 above, as well as consumer, technology, healthcare, education, and back those entrepreneurs which in sectors where we have less expertise in, and then work with them and grow their business. Now, opportunities that we've been talking about, and challenges, I don't want to focus too much. There are always challenges, always challenges. If we want to make money, there will always be some challenge or the other. It's just how to plan for it. In India, you just have to plan for the unexpected. Things come from the left field and you're not aware of, but we just need to be nimble and be able to take care of stuff.
Cool stuff, sir. Thank you. So, Gaurav, if I come to you, plan for the unexpected. Again, you're working in sectors, financial inclusion, you've as an institution got a certain kind of social focus as well woven into your overall conversation. What's your take?
Sure. So I think what I'll say is that the UK's Department for International Development in this setting is better known as the parent of CDC, but we are also emerging and coming into our own right through our own sort of investment programs in India. And many of them, like you said, Jaideep, they are focused on the bottom of the pyramid and actually working with the microfinance and those institutions to be able to, A, get to the largest population of India, which is in the rural hinterlands, getting them included, and then trying to offer them capital at a price point that they want, so that they can also become entrepreneurs and they can also become success stories and they can also headline Economic Times in a day within the next few years. That's where we are trying to work, and we feel that's a market gap. We also encourage a lot of others entrepreneurs to go and work on models with the new market that's coming up, whether it's distribution models, delivery models, because most of India and the growth is now going to come in from the segment that's currently not included in that sense. For us, again, important themes also include sustainability, whether it's on energy, again, working on the rural-urban divide, and when people look at opportunities in agriculture and the lack of opportunity sometimes there, they tend to migrate. And then how do you then look at the urban growth as power centers to power the economy? And when these centers become filled with people who are lower middle income, do we have the right set of products at the price point that they can adapt and buy? Because that is going to power the growth. And also the flip side of that, which is, with more urban consumers, also comes more opportunities. For example, waste. We have somewhere here a company trying to come up with Blue Planet, trying to come up with end-to-end waste management solutions, for example. So can we have more of such, radical entry into sectors where we take a holistic view of the country and can power things through? And also, while we do that, I think, make sure that women, whose participation rate right now is about 30% in India's economy, and if we are to become a 9 trillion economy by 2030, then that really needs to double and more than double in that sense. So how are we addressing all of those? I think when I'm talking about that, let me just also say that there are definitely long-term opportunities that I've highlighted here in these sectors. There are also long-term challenges. For example, half of India currently does not have sustainable clean drinking water. And that problem is only going to go more acute. So are we conscious, and is this eminent group here and within our networks, are we thinking about doing things sustainably and well? And can we convert that long-term challenge into a long-term opportunity? That's also there as an option. Yeah?
So Prashant, we've had a bunch of sort of points made about sustainability, diversity, environment. Let me just turn the page a little bit and move the conversation along. One of the big challenges we've had in the last 5 to 7 years has been the worsening situation with NPAs. And paradoxically, it's also created a great opportunity for investors in the form of the whole sort of stressed assets piece and the government's commendable efforts to actually figure out a way to solve the problem and put institutional frameworks around it. I know you've been very, very active in this space. Perhaps a little bit on that, and I guess the second part also is, around the whole notion of financial inclusion, and whether it be, SME lending or supporting women entrepreneurs or supporting entrepreneurs in general. What are your views, so if I may?
So let me just put in context of the macro trends I think that people talked about, and I think we heard interesting perspective. Both from an international investors as well as the more socially conscious developmental side of work that we heard, my colleagues talk about that. We are a firm believer, we are a local firm here, that the size and scale of Indian opportunity is there to stay for a long period of time. While global macros do have an effect, I personally believe that the global macros play probably a maximum 2 percentage point difference to where the country would go. So now that we have less expansionary phase in the global side with China slowing down, Europe slowing down, right? So you're probably hitting around 7s and 8, right? If we were in expansionary phase like pre-2009, we would probably close to 10 with the same policies, right? But that's the only difference. The real big thing is really what we do with our own policy making, right? There will always be successes, there will always be mixes. Sometimes we tend to put politics a little more ahead of in terms of importance. History shows that actually the strength of the government is probably not a highly correlating factor with government. I think it's a question of how enlightened the economic policy or the main policy leadership is, right? Because we had some of the weakest government bring us finance minister like Manmohan Singh and so on and so forth. We had the strongest government with Indira Gandhi, right? We did all the nationalization and all. Much of our reform is only unwinding those things, right? So I think it's right. So I think we have to look from that. And it was in that context, if you see, we believe in India, we are still opening up a lot of big sector. The stress and distress sector has opened up. If we look at ICICI Venture Own, in last 5 years, 2 of the largest pools of capital that we really did have been on that. We raised $830 million of Aeon, which was a special situation, right, which today is at $1.2 billion along with co-investment. So it went much ahead because more money was coming in. We raised $850 million for power sector distress, where we just done our first deal. We bought 1.93 gigawatt of a stressed power asset, right, in Prayagraj, right, for something like 6,000 crores, right. Both of those were there, and I think we were a little ahead of the curve, doing this 3 to 4 years ahead while it is happening. And I think an IBC is a deep-rooted reform. In a sense, if you ask me, if you focus only on healthy living and stuff like that, and have no health care and no intensive care and right type of infrastructure, you would not have a healthy, far living society. In our thing, we have development financial institution, we had everything, but we really had nothing to really say. Look, some companies will go sick, right? Healthy people go sick, companies go sick, right? There is stress, there is distress. We really had no infrastructure much around that place, right? We had only one BIFR, right? Effectively faffing around, doing really nothing much, right? The RBI rules, etc., were very constricting. Essentially, you said if that happened, just ignore, right? I think that's where it has come to. I think we are now in a sustained fashion. Now that will also mean that even the investment climate would dramatically improve because you have way out, right? It's not a dead end. Similarly, I think the strong big reforms are also taking place in real estate sector, right? That was something which I think one of the panelists mentioned as well. I think RERA is a very strong intervention on that side. We're seeing some early gains coming out of it. I think that will really come in. I think the entire impetus on the affordable housing segment is a really big one. One of the points that we have raised in our real estate segment this year has been affordable housing segment, right? Because I think that's where the jobs will get created. That's where the big social impact. These are both social impact to other side, right? Similarly, there's a larger trend around social inclusion. To some extent, subsidies which are indirect subsidies to that direct subsidies into the banks are probably more efficient way of doing it, right? We started with DBT in some of the cases. I think the current move of saying, forget all that, just put directly a cash subsidy to weaker section has a strong impetus both on consumption across all of this, better and efficient utilization of this money for what is appropriate in those. So the government, instead of being prescriptive that you got to use urea or you got to use this, is actually leaving it with the wisdom of the people down there. And I think that entire movement politically is you can't roll it back. And I think it's good. There's a whole set of businesses which will roll out along on that side. I think there are some strong big trends which are moving, right? And financial inclusion will largely grow through that. And we'll tell you, we have one business. We have a white label ATM business which opens exclusively in semi-urban and rural side. We have seen our transaction in those ATM growing at 25 to 30% year on year, largely led by DBT. The 6,000 rupees will be the one which will also go into the account. They will need some infrastructure to withdraw that, right? As simple things like that. Once they'll withdraw it, they will spend it, right? And the whole circulation will start. So I think there are some strong things happening. That's where there. If I'll just touch one last bit as well, since you mentioned that, Jaideep. The entire SME side, and I think the reason why, from a directionality thing, that becomes very important is, while the Walmart deals, which was mentioned in the opening remark, are good from a headline one. They are in many sense like, in my campus, everyone focuses on the top paying job in an IIM, right? I would say IIM Ahmedabad being there, but right? But that's not really where really things get determined. It's really where the mass employment happens. It is what the average in the class and the bulk of the class and the mean level of wages coming out of business close is what should the real news. It doesn't really come out as the news. I think the job creation will largely happen also in SME sector, right? Sure. Right? And it is that force of engine which is there. I think politically that is being realized. right? In fact, we have been now, we have already have 4 verticals, right? We have one infra vertical, we have a special set, we have, of course, a private equity growth and a real estate. One other thing where we have been now working on, hopefully this year we should have a product out is really how do we channel a lot of our private equity money into SMEs.
So are you announcing a new business vertical, sir?
We are. In fact, we have been actively working. Actually, we looked at 2 fairly correct. We looked at impact. The challenge that we faced with that, while impact is a lot of money available, scale opportunity to do that in impact is very little because the government really preoccupies most of the space. Other spaces goes to the NGO, right? So commercial model on that, to our mind, is still iffy from a size perspective. But we think SME side is probably right. So we are exploring both, but we think probably we are more likely to go into the SME side. I think that's where it's come. I think the policy measures is likely to be increasingly more supportive as the wider realization does come that big is beautiful, the bigger conference, the bigger industries are beautiful is not necessarily correct, right? We got to balance this out between the whole thing. So those are some of the couple of
Thank you, sir. And Ranu, when we talk about employment, making a difference, making an impact, I think while in a different context, a few things have made a bigger impact in recent years than the sort of new economy companies, whether it be the consumer internet companies. Now we are seeing a new wave of B2B technology houses. I think just today or yesterday there was a talk about the next wave of unicorns coming from the B2B space. And I know you've been involved in the tech ecosystem for the longest time. Share some thoughts on this dimension of the economy. I think it's not been touched upon that much so far. How do you see this playing out? What opportunities does this create? And also, I guess, it'll be an incomplete discussion if we didn't touch upon the regulation risk, which is most famously playing out in the e-commerce space right now. So, your thoughts, sir?
Thank you, Jaideep, and congratulations on the 10th edition of this summit. I think from an Avendus perspective, we have looked at the ecosystem, the technology ecosystem in several ways. I think we continue to be a large predominant advisor to companies. This year, about 2/3 market share in all advised deals. We have also, invested in companies which are making a mark in digital and tech. So it's in our minds very clearly, without any ambiguity, one of the largest opportunities globally, not just in India. And let me just tell you what it means. I mean, essentially about $1 trillion is going to be added over the next 5 to 6 years in value coming out of these digital companies alone, right? India today has, give or take, about 30 unicorns. That number, we, from our own internal estimates, is likely to be about 100 in the next 3 to 4 years. So if these facts don't tell us about a clear opportunity facing us today, then nothing else will. So I want all of us to realize that there is a very serious investing opportunity, value creation opportunity, and market impact opportunity which is available in the digital and tech ecosystem. Whole host of companies are doing work in different areas. It's not just one size fits all. There are companies in the fintech area. Financial inclusion was one of the themes being talked about. That is being brought by some of these companies. I know there are several conversations happening around digital banks, which will essentially take this to the next level. Likewise, logistics and the use of technology in logistics is changing things the way they are done at the grassroots level, including transportation. So there is a whole mix of companies, widespread movement, which is happening. And in my mind, it is led by entrepreneurs who are young, entrepreneurs who have not been beneficiaries of any government largesse or in fact have learned to live with the challenges which the market provides. So from different perspectives, we see that it's a great place for investors to be. I think, just coming to the other kind of key opportunities which face us today. One of the things which the panel has talked about, which is both an opportunity and a challenge, is the whole issue around ESG and governance. And I think there is no better time for India than to have pools of capital dedicated to this. In fact, Avendus announced its own first ESG fund in August of last year. because we see that movement worldwide. In India, there is $100 billion invested in equity assets and zero money in concentrated ESG pools. Globally, that has moved from 14% to as much as a quarter of all global AUMs are going towards ESG. So from our perspective, we realize that while the market today, the size today continues to be a bit of a challenge. How much money can you deploy really, as Prashant also touched upon the impact part, but we realize that you can consume, given that there is really a dearth of ESG specific products, you can consume as much as $1 billion or $1 billion plus in that. So I think, those are the two big themes which are facing. The third thing, which right now is again a challenge and an opportunity, is lack of long-term capital. We are seeing so many companies, interesting business models just die down because there are very few limited pools of capital. And interestingly, who's participating in this growth in digital value? It is some family from Sweden, some family from South Africa, some hedge fund from New York. Where are the other investors? Where are we creating an incentive and possibilities for Indian investors to invest? So I think, that is something which worries me. Though, I would say the local capital is kind of growing very fast, but still there's a lack of, kind of overall capital. Just touching upon the last point which you mentioned about regulation, I think regulation worldwide is becoming a challenge. If in India we think it's a challenge, please go to the US and ask folks on how difficult it is becoming there. So I think regulators, and I have a strong belief that regulators are practical and logical. Right? I chaired a committee, last year, which was focused on helping Indian startups list overseas, and overseas companies list in India, the digital companies and otherwise. And I cannot tell you the kind of experience I had dealing with SEBI, which was the prime regulator here, and their cooperation and their willingness to look at new products, new territories, new areas, and making sure that there were no impediments in the way when these companies come. So I think, by and large, regulation is going to be logical and practical over a mid to long term. I think the only view and the only huge challenge in India which people have to get used to is that we will not go from point A to point B in a linear manner. There will always be up and down, there will be volatility there. So any investor who's looking at India has to be prepared for that non-linear movement and has to be ready to take a ride on a train which is not going along a set track. It might change the track a few times. You might have to deboard the train and reboard the train.
So see, I to some extent I agree with you, but be that as it may, if we take the current fracas going on in the e-commerce side, and I'd love to get maybe the overseas views on this and the views from maybe ADB as well. We have investors who've come in based on a certain policy framework, and they've invested 10, 15, $20 billion in some cases. And then we move the goalposts because the elections are coming up and there's a core constituency of the ruling party which is up in arms against the so-called, and I'll also say to you, I've studied the sector closely in my previous life as well. There is a lot of merit in the complaints that the traditional retailers have with respect to predatory pricing and so-called capital dumping and so on. So it's not without merit. The point being that without warning, if you kind of move the goalposts, then it creates shocks in the system, which I think it's fair to say investors could potentially do without. That was the limited point I make. I come completely with you. Anyone who's been in India and who wants to be in India in the future, these hairpin bends you've just got to live with, But at some point we also, I guess the point I'm making is we need to mature our regulatory ecosystem. So while it will get tougher and there should be more scrutiny, but can it be done in a smoother way and and maybe if I can throw this open to the panel, if anyone's got a point of view on this. Prashant?
Can I say something? Right? This is like our roads in India. They're supposed to be smooth, right? They're supposed to be directions, right? When I'm on a road, I should know whether this is going towards Ahmedabad or it is going towards Bangalore, right? I mean, if the road suddenly going towards Ahmedabad is made to go towards Bangalore, that's not really an efficient transport, right? And we don't have to be like that, right? Sometimes, and I think that's where I have a little difference with what Ranu said. You got to used to be doing that. I think the chalta hai attitude wouldn't do. People wouldn't come to us, right? I think there is a sovereignty in policy making. Let's be very clear. Every country needs to make it for its own citizen, for social good, right? And that could be different from how US does it or West does it. I think what is only important is to really have broad guidelines and a directional roadmap. I think where we fail is in arbitrariness and sudden reversal of this thing, which is exactly what a pothole is. It's, right? Or a step function is, right? When you have a ramp coming, you could have a ramp coming just like that, or you could have smooth coming up the ramp.
Yeah.
Right? I think the question very simply is, put roadmaps, put policy guidelines, let there be discussion so there's wide awareness of where we are going. Like if we believe that the earlier regime, right, which has the predatory pricing and all, have a phase out and say in 2 to 3 years' time, this is where we want to go, we will do this, right, by then these things. You don't say on 1st of February, right, and we tell you on 1st of January, you would not have this, right? I think that's the problem.
That's, I completely
I think that's the problem. I do not think broadly otherwise policy. I think the suddenness and arbitrary.
Sure. Mank, you had a point?
Yeah, so I wanted to make 2 points to Prashant. I mean, what he's saying is right on a theoretical sense. But, dealing with these situations in India for a long time, there are 2 problems. One, the capacity at the decision maker level, which is the parliament or the judiciary, the capacity to comprehend and understand these economic issues and what are the long-term implications, that's very weak. It's very good at the rally at the top level, but as you start coming down, especially at the state levels, our experience is the bureaucracy and the politicians, they don't understand. In fact, many politicians at the top level also don't understand the economic issues. Right? The second is that you have this perpetual election cycle, where some election or other is happening and some constituency needs to be placated all the time. And so this long-term planning, Niti Aayog comes with beautiful 15-year vision documents, but I mean, you look at every single step which we are going as regressive, farm loan waivers or reservations, everything is a regressive. I mean, you're not creating capital assets which are productive in the long run. You are trying to solve basically, you're giving a paracetamol to solve a fever, but what is behind that fever? You are actually not solving that disease.
Okay.
Yeah, just to sort of, again, I think he's done that, where I was trying to take a big picture to say that India broadly, structurally, is on a very positive trajectory where, ease of doing business is coming down. Yes, there are problems, but there are also solutions. And also bipartisan support in some ways. I mean, whichever government has come in, some reforms have continued. And, even the likes of GST, IBC, the direct benefit transfer, Aadhaar, and a lot of the others are actually reforms with both sort of sides or everybody in the political sort of circuit agrees in that sense. I think there is optimism, there is positivity, and with that we should open up maybe to questions.
Well, all the best with that. That's the longest answer I've ever seen in any of my panels I've ever moderated. And it only shows you, and I guess it's a great place to finish. It only shows you that how much consciousness there is, I guess, in really bringing diversity front and center to the conversation. And wrapped around that as well, using the considerable resources that we have. So even as we look to make money and we look to deliver returns to our investors, we also want to be actually doing good, actually making a positive impact on society, on environment. And I think you've heard a whole bunch of stories from the panelists today on how in their own different ways they're actually doing that. And I can't think of a better way to start the day and a better sort of place to finish this discussion. Please give a big round of applause to my lovely panelists. Thank you very much, folks.